Hello, everyone. What's going on? And I hope you're excited for the return of post-game recaps. Haven't done one of these in a while because I haven't been at a long over-the-board tournament since the summer. We're talking more than 4 days, but we're here now for my final tournament of the year, which is called the Charlotte Open. I am playing in the under 2200 section, and I just finished up round one, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of what happened, but because it's been a very long time since my last game recap, I'll have to catch you up on my progress since that tournament, of which I uploaded one game recap of at the Marshall Chess Club, that was my last tournament there. I played in two events. I played in the Northeast Open in the beginning of November. I played in the open section of that one, and I scored 2.5 out of 5. Went from 2036 to 2060. Then, at the end of November, over Thanksgiving weekend, I played in another big tournament called the National Chess Congress. That one was 6 rounds, and I scored 4.5 out of 6 in the under 2200 section. Now, I did actually record a recap video of that tournament after the fact, but I really didn't want it to be super long, and yet still by the time I finished recording it, it was like 50 minutes. And so a little bit of laziness and a little bit of me not wanting to put out such a long video, and I ended up just not uploading anything. I could have, in hindsight, probably recorded 6 separate recap videos, but that would have been a very tedious task to do after the tournament. So I decided just not to do anything until this tournament, because this is the first tournament I've ever flown to. It's pretty serious, and I will be making recaps after every game, or at least every day. We'll see if I have time after every game, but I will at the very least be making a recap at the end of each day. So this was the first round. I was paired against about an 1890-ish rated player. I should add I am close to being the favorite for the section. I'm somewhere in the top 10. Now, my goal going into this tournament is to play solid chess, convert my advantages, not let any slip away, as sometimes have happened in previous tournaments, and try to get 5.5 points out of 7. Now, whether that's going to be enough to win the tournament, we'll see, but that's just kind of my goal. And so we begin the first game. I should add the time control is 2 hours per side with a 5-second delay. No bonus time after 40 moves, as happens in some tournaments. So the games here are not going to be overly long. They still could go easily over 4 hours, but definitely a little bit of an adjustment from the 30-second increment that I'm used to playing. And so my opponent played e5. I did a little bit of prep before the game. I saw that he would play this, and so I played d4 here. He took, and now you're thinking, oh, I'm probably going to play the Danish, right? c3. Nope, I take with the queen. And this is an opening called the center game, and after knight c6, queen e3, it's called the Paulson attack. Now, I played a game like this in the World Open back in July. You can catch a recap of that on the channel. But this game went a little bit differently. In that game, my opponent had gone with a setup with g6 and then bishop g7. But in this game, my opponent opted for d6, which is a little bit a passive kind of version. Like the most standard way to play is knight f6 and bishop b4. But he played d6, which I'm happy to see because it leads into one of my favorite setups within this little bit offbeat opening, where I get to fianchetto on the queen side with bishop b2, and then both sides castle, and I long castle. And so we get this interesting position where I've developed my entire queen side, and none of my king side yet, and he has done basically the opposite. So it's already a very sharp, very dynamic position. My goal is going to be to attack on the king side by some kind of a pawn storm, whether it's like f4 or whether it's f3, g4, maybe even h4, h5. It could get wild. His plan is going to be to counter that with either a5 and try to run the pawn down this way, or he could go for some kind of actually, let me make these arrows red so we don't confuse them. Yeah, something like this, or maybe a6, b5, and we'll see what he ends up doing, and he ends up playing a6. So that's one way to go. And so at this point, up until this position, 8, I was pretty much in book, like this is my prep. But now it was time to think, and here I played the sort of prophylactic move king b1. Why did I play king b1? What does that do? Well, my idea is to start storming the pawns, but the problem is, if I play f3 and then g4, you always have to be careful about your king being a little bit exposed. And here he actually would have this little trick, knight takes pawn. And the point is that if I recapture, he would have this very nasty move, bishop g5, which skewers and actually just wins him the game. I would have had to back off here, and then he can just bring his knight back, or even, still annoy me, do something like this. Now he's threatening to get into f2. Moral of the story is, before you play f3, just play king b1. The king tuck it away to safety, and now we're ready to go. He plays b5, and I ended up playing f3. Thought about it for a little bit, because I was a little concerned that he was going to, play something like b4 here. And I was thinking, okay, I probably don't want to go to d5, because, if we have this trade, then I'm letting his bishop get to e6 with tempo. That's not great. I also don't really want to take by pawn, because then later he can get his bishop to f5. Or maybe it's not so bad, but I don't know. I just didn't really feel like I wanted to open the e-file for him. So I was prepared to play knight a4 and just kind of keep the knight here. Makes it a little bit hard for him to get through with the pawns. But he played bishop b7, which I thought was a little bit strange. Typically when I'm long castled here, the bishop would be a little bit better placed than e6 because it's kind of aiming down this way towards the king. On b7, it kind of blocks the b-file, which he might want to put a rook on. So I thought this was a little bit odd. And so I just continued with the plan of g4. Granted, I did think about knight e2 for a little bit, but I thought, let's just play g4 first, and then I can always play knight e2 later. And here he played knight e5. And what it appeared to me was that his idea was to prepare to move his c-pawn. Because the problem is, like in this position, black is very passive. His bishop is like very dead, like it just literally can't move. His other bishop isn't that great either. Like really, he doesn't have any great pieces. He's just kind of stuck, behind this wall, and he's just waiting for me to start advancing on the king side. If he gives me a couple moves, I'm going to play like h4, h5, g5, and I'm just going to open up the king side and mate him. That's basically my goal. And so he has to do something. And so his idea with knight e5 is to try to push the c-pawn. And this I found to be a little bit concerning, because let's imagine I give him some time, like maybe c5, maybe, let's say I play knight, not knight f4, but just knight g3, just something simple. He can then play some combination of b4 and c4. Like he can start with this move and force my knight away, or he could play this first, and then, if I play b4, then I'm giving him kind of a hook. He can maybe play a5 and target my pawn. And even if I were to win a pawn here somehow, he can always take this way. Or if I take here, he can take back the pawn or even push. So I would probably do something of my own, and then he can maybe play b4, and then eventually c3, and he shuts down my bishop. And this I really did not like, the prospect of having my bishop shut down. Now, granted, he would need a couple moves to do that, and I'm in time to stop him, but it was just a little bit of a concern. Like, you don't want to let your opponent get their plan off. So I decided to immediately focus on playing g5 and kicking his knight away from f6. But I didn't want to play g5 right away, because then I thought he plays his knight on h5, and if I play f4, he can back up to d7 or play knight g4. And I was calculating this for a bit, because I thought, okay, my queen's under attack. I have to go somewhere. What about if I go to f3? Because I hit his knight, and it actually is kind of trapped. Like, he doesn't really have anywhere to move it. If he defends it, then I can even play h3, and then, again, it's just trapped. But then I thought, he can play f5. And the point is that I can't take, because he has this nasty pin, kind of punishing me for not developing my kingside pieces. And then if I play h3 here, this I kind of miscalculated a little bit. In my head, it looked worse for me than it actually is, because I thought takes, but I guess I didn't realize that I can just take this, and I thought, like, yeah, he's going to win this pawn back. And I thought this looked a little bit unclear. Now, really, this position is just me being up a piece for, a piece for 2 pawns. It's a little bit messy, though, because this pawn on g5 is hanging. He has his pawn on e4. If he pushes it, then, once again, the bishop is going to come to life. But white should be better. But, eventually I was like, why am I calculating this whole mess? Let me just play bishop e2 first. And the idea is that now when I play g5, he can't play knight h5 at all. Because now when I play f4, it's a double attack. The knight's hit, and this knight's hit by the bishop. So here, he's just losing a piece. Like, he has no way to save them. So, when I play g5, what I thought was going to happen is I thought he was going to bring his knight back this way, and then I would play f4, and then he would bring his knight back this way. And so I basically have 2 tempos on his knights where I force them to move back, and in the meantime, I'm advancing my pawns, getting closer to his king. The funny thing was that he decided on 2 completely different moves with his knights. He went back to e8, and then he went back to d7. Doesn't make a huge difference. I think his idea was just that he wanted to kind of reroute his knight to fight for the d5 square, and you're going to see that happen. Here I just played knight f3 just to develop another piece, and he went for knight b6. Now, I thought maybe he should play f5 here to kind of slow down my pawn advances, but at the same time, it's a little bit risky because he's opening his king, and maybe I would have some check like this, and then his rook is pinned, and this already looks pretty iffy for black. Like, you can notice all of his pieces are just very passive. Like, every piece practically, they can't really move that well, and I am just starting to advance. So it's becoming increasingly unpleasant for black. So he plays the move knight to b6. And so he is preparing some kind of, again, c4, b4 maybe. And here I thought about trying to meet it with knight d5. But then I said, okay, let me just play f5 here, because I am getting closer to attacking his king. Enemy is at the gates. He has to now be very careful. But unfortunately, careful is not really what he was, because he played b4. I thought he should play knight c7 here, so that well, first of all, I can't play knight d5 now because he will just take and he wins a pawn. Now, I could maybe play f6 here, but I didn't think that it was quite enough yet. However, he played b4 in the game, attacking my knight. Of course, I moved it to d5. Doesn't really have anywhere else to go. He takes, and then plays knight c7. And this is kind of like the critical moment of the game, because my pawn on d5 is hit by both knights. So I either have to defend it, or I can ignore it and reply with some aggression of my own. And so here I spent some time. How long did I actually spend? Spent about 13 minutes calculating whether I should play the move f6. The idea of which is just to basically rip open the g-file towards his king. And it looked promising, but I also had to consider some alternatives. I considered whether I should maybe just defend the pawn with queen e4, because he's not going to want to take the pawn if he loses 2 knights for a rook. That's not going to be any good. Like, this is just so bad for black. His bishop is still dead, and my minor pieces are going to slaughter him. But maybe he could play f6 here, I thought, and he closes the diagonal for my bishop. Granted, it's still very unpleasant for him because this bishop is, again, just so dead. Like, it might as well be a pawn. But I didn't really see any concrete breakthrough for myself. Like, maybe I could start to run the h-pawn, but he might also try to, make some plays on my king. And the last thing I considered was c4. Interesting move where I basically create this pawn chain to block out his knights. So basically he would be inclined to take the pawn, but then I take with the queen. And he does not have the time to win the pawn on d5 because I threatened checkmate on g7. And so again, he would play f6. And again, I thought this looked good because he can never really win the d-pawn, because as soon as he takes it, I just come in with bishop c4, and because of the pin, he's losing. Like, if he takes the bishop, I just take with the queen, and this knight is just lost. He can't move it. But I thought, okay, if he just plays like h6, like this position looks really good because his bishop might as well once again be a pawn. He can't move it at all, and his knights don't have great moves either. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I didn't really want to go for some kind of a positional squeeze. I wanted to checkmate him. Like, that's what this opening is about at the end of the day. So after a while, I decided, let's just go for it, f6. And so the critical line here that what he should have played was he should have taken this pawn, at which point I would play queen e4. And now if he took this pawn, I would then take his knight. This is what I thought. And then again, I would get the two knights for the rook. He would get a couple pawns in return, but in this position, his king is just wide open, and he's not going to survive very long here because, this bishop is just an absolute monster. This bishop is ready to come in. It's over. And the funny thing is that it's even over in this position because during my calculation, I missed that I would have a very simple move, bishop d3. And this is just winning on the spot because he can't stop mate on h7. He can block, but I would take. He can move his rook so that his king has one extra square it can go to, but it's not going to be enough because eventually it's going to be checkmate. So what he really should have done just to stay in the game would have been to sacrifice the knight here and get this position where black has 3 pawns for a piece, which mathematically is equal, but because I have the more pieces in the middle game, it's an advantage for me, but it's not that easy here. Like, maybe we'd get some position where something like this, where we trade the bishops, he has this kind of majority in the center, but it's probably tough for black because I'm still, I still have prospects of attacking down the g-file, but at least he's alive and he can try to fight on. However, he did not like that prospect, and so he, after a little bit of time, decided to actually take the pawn on f6. He took. And I was like, all right, buddy, it's over, because now he takes the bishop, and he thought he could survive this, but, I mean, look at this position. There is no surviving this. Simple move, check. King goes to h8. And now what would you play? How do we continue the attack? Well, the fact that I have this pressure down this diagonal is really kind of the deciding factor, because now I play queen h6. And I have the threat of queen takes bishop, and so he basically has to take, because if he tries to, well, he can't really defend the bishop. That's the problem. He can't play knight e8 because that blunders the rook with mate. So he has to take. And so he thought I was going to take the bishop, and then he would sort of defend this. Now, I mean, even this is beyond saving. I mean, like, look at this position. If you are in this spot and you're black, just know it's over, because I can just play bishop d3, and you have to play f5 basically to stop mate. And like, you can try to defend this position, but I mean, it's so hopeless. Like, every one of my pieces is prepared to attack. His knights are off sides. The material is actually even, but the position is not even. Like, black is about to get slaughtered here. But it didn't even come to that, because after bishop takes bishop on b2, in advance, like before we even got to this position, when I was calculating f6, I realized that I have a very simple winning move here. I don't have to take the bishop at all. I can just play knight g5. And the idea is that I am threatening mate on h7, and the only way he can prevent it is to sack his queen, after which it's still over. Because after queen takes, rook takes, let's say he saves his bishop, now I play rook h5. And again, I'm just mating him on h7. So he did not even play on, he simply resigned in this position, because he's basically getting mated, like, sooner or later. And that gave me a relatively straightforward 23-move win. Not quite as easy as it seemed. Still had to do a lot of calculation, but the game was over in just about 2 hours, which is pretty short for a classical time control game. And so yeah, we're off to a decent start. Going to try to keep up the momentum going into tomorrow. Again, I'm not sure yet if I'm going to be able to record a recap after every individual game, but I will definitely have one at the end of each day, at the very least. So stay tuned for those, and I will talk to you later.